just joking, although they did go final. St. John's in the Garden takes down UConn. Rick Pitino's first win over a top 5 team, Jeff Goodman, since February 2016. So it's been a decade since that happened.
Crazy.
It is crazy. But look, it was turnovers. It was physicality. It was a great night from Zuby Ejiofor. It was big-time shot making from Dylan Darling. This definitely felt like St. John's went all out for this game, and obviously they delivered.
Yeah, and they needed this one. I mean, think about it. Like, what did they really have in their resume? You know, they're ranked, but you look at it and you're like, missed opportunity after missed opportunity, beating a bunch of like good teams, but not great teams. Villanova is really the only NCAA tournament team, at-large team, that St. John's had beaten. So they needed this one. And again, you go in, I went to this game last year, and it was electric. I mean, you know, Pitino walked out, and it was just like you almost had chills before the game. It was that big, and they won it, and they won the Big East regular season. This year, it's been a little different, right? UConn's been the dominant team in the Big East all year. We're talking about them running the table. And I thought, you know, the biggest thing to me was their front line came to play for St. John's, and they were tough. And that hasn't been the case a lot this year. They've been out-rebounded plenty of times in these big games where they've lost. And Zuby was great, especially in the second half. Dylan Mitchell, they had no answer for, you know, long, athletic, you know, and he was just able to kind of impose his will. And I thought Bryce Hopkins was good. So those three had to be great. And to me, they imposed their will on UConn's bigs tonight.
Mike, had St. John's get this done? What'd you see from your seat tonight?
Certainly the front court. I think anytime you get 11 of your 16 assists from the front court, that's what makes St. John's such a difficult cover, is because Silas Demery is such a ball hawk, but he's used to guarding point guards. And so you take that ability away from UConn in a way, and you have most of the facilitation coming from the front court. And then they can also take you off the dribble. Dylan Mitchell doesn't need a ball screen. He can just go by you and use his strength. Dylan Mitchell is the one that I think, and we'll probably talk about Darling, we'll talk about Ejiofor, but since Dylan Mitchell has been inserted into the starting lineup, everything's changed for St. John's. I mean, he was already a great changeup off the bench, just given his size and the way he pressures the ball. But I think he had 4 games up until he got inserted in the starting lineup 9 games ago. He had 4 games all season of 35-plus minutes. Last 5 games, or last 6 games now, 5 of the 6 games he's played 35-plus minutes, and the one game he didn't, he had foul trouble in the first half, and he was sitting. And I just think you saw like they tried to stick Mullins on him early, and they were doing some switching too, UConn was, but they're not going to let you get to switches because Mitchell can just get downhill on you. He doesn't, like I said, he doesn't need a ball screen. So that was a matchup problem for them early. And then just as the game went on, it felt like they could not take Terrace Reed off the floor. Or else, you know, and Ryba's been fabulous for UConn. But the pivotal point in the game for me was 67-65. I think it was Ejiofor that misses the free throw, and Ryba gets swim move. They get a free throw, you know, block out. They miss a free throw block out, and St. John's gets the rebound. Dylan Mitchell gets a layup to make it 69-65, and they kind of didn't look back after that. So Jeff touched on it. The front court for sure. But I just, to this day, watching St. John's play in that arena, I cannot wrap my head around a fan base making an NBA arena, really make you feel like the walls are closing in. That's not easy to do in an NBA arena, and they tend to do it. I think it's because UConn has because 30% are UConn fans, it creates even more of that
animosity.
That fire, but right.
And they've been waiting.
It was awesome.
Like they've been waiting so long for this that you do get some of the star treatment come out for the St. John's Johnnies, as John Martin likes to call it.
Hey, I will say this, Goodman, you got to let them know, man, if you want to feel an NBA arena's walls close in, you got to come to a little Memphis versus Tulsa action at FedEx Forum. I mean, that is where you want to feel an environment, Mike. I want to come back to you, though, because watching this one, you know, just when UConn, it felt like, you know, you make that run, they cut it to 5. You're like, all right, here come the shots. They finally slowed this game down, Mike. And I'm going to Mike here, Goodman, so relax. He's my basketball expert. It's just turnovers. untimely turnovers. Silas Demery's worst career games from a turnover perspective have both come against UConn. One of those games he was in a Georgia uniform. Tonight he was in a UConn uniform, obviously. What did St. John's do tonight that particularly made it so difficult for UConn to hold on to the ball?
Well, part of it is because UConn has, and it's what makes UConn good, is they have long developing offense. There's a lot of screens. There's a lot of action that gets you into a particular trigger that opens guys up. And all that's going on the floor, you got to have a point guard, which I think Silas Demery is, and that's why it's difficult. You got to have a guy, it's like a quarterback when everybody runs a go route and you got to sit in the pocket. Your protection's got to be good. That's what I feel like tonight for Demery, because you got to be so good with your ball security, handling the ball, especially if you have a live dribble while all this other action is developing. And that's not easy to do. So there were some jump balls in there. He had a couple offensive fouls. Probably only like 5 of the 9 or 4 of the 9 were live ball turnovers, but they made life difficult on him. I thought Dylan Darling came in. He sparked that 10-0 run for St. John's there in the second half. He looked like freaking Aaron Kraft for 4 minutes. He just refused to get screened. He just, and Ian Jackson got pulled for letting Silas Demery turn a corner and get downhill. So Darling clearly is going in the game like, I can't get beat. And for that stretch that he had, he flipped this game kind of on its head. I mean, we talked about Ejiofor, like I said, and Dylan Mitchell, but Darling played a big part in that.
Zooby Dooby Doo.
Big plays. John, he's made big plays at the end of games, whether it's defensively, whether it's making shots. And again, I think a lot of teams dare him to take those shots. But he's tough. Like, you could tell, like, he's tough. I don't know if he's talented enough to play long minutes. That's the only thing I worry about with them still. If he plays what he played tonight, he played 21 minutes tonight. I think that's about what you want to play him max. But again, he gets after it defensively, kind of he and Mitchell set the tone a little bit. Like, Mitchell was as good as I've seen Dylan Mitchell play since maybe he was a freshman at Texas. Like, he just looked comfortable putting the ball on the floor a little bit. Obviously, the tip-ins, the energy is going to be there, but I feel like he's just more comfortable doing things with the ball in his hands than he's ever been. Yeah,
there were the two shots. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say 2 things there. One, I think Dylan Mitchell made himself some money tonight. 1.
Yes.
Yes. 2, Dylan Darling. So this is interesting to me because it's so rare to have a guy that has all the glue guy type, traits to him, that can come in, doesn't really care about scoring, but can score, wants to guard, wants to take your ball, wants to do all the dirty work stuff. But then when the time calls for it, he can channel the player of the year stuff from last year and can dial up the scoring. He wants the big moments. He's been in the big moments in games. And that's a trait that's really rare for players, especially players that come off the bench. And I think Woolley showed this for Louisville at times this year in the absence of Brown, where it's like, hey, I can be the 20-a-game Kennesaw State guy too. And I think that's what I think is really neat about Darling and just his makeup overall, because he doesn't need to score, but you see the punch when it's there, and then he does all the other stuff too that I think Pitino loves.
Yeah, there were 2 shots that come to mind immediately. It was the off balance, basically at the free throw line there. I think to get it back to 4, really, like, it's a shot that if you're UConn, you live with a million times out of a million, but he made it. And then the 3, which again is a shot that if you're UConn, you live with it, but he made it. And that's college basketball, man. You know what I mean? Like, you play the mathematical probabilities that I'll give him that shot, but sometimes those go in. And for the St. John's team, Jeff, as we wait for Rob Doster, just the charges
do we really
that are
think Doster's coming? Like, do we think he's sitting in a bathroom in the bowels right now, the Garden, absolutely bawling, like in a corner? Can you picture him right now, like in a corner of the bathroom, just crying?
Yeah, first of all, that is yeah.
I got a mango cart waiting for him here. I got a mango cart waiting. I got my own, and I got one for Rob, just in case.
That is no way to talk about the host of the renowned Top Dogs podcast on this network.
It's true.
All right, can you have a little bit more respect? for
It's going to be
the
a
St.
tough
John.
episode.
It is, but we'll do it with him here shortly. Speaking of respect, though, the St. John's team. I mean, there was a moment they lose at home to Providence, and they're sliding to the in the mid to late 20s at KenPom, which again is certainly historically totally fine if you're St. John's, but just based on what we expect from Rick Pitino. And then since then they're rolling, and obviously cap it off tonight. So just how much different is this team from the Providence loss, the Auburn loss, et cetera?
I think they're different, Mike, don't you? But here's the thing. Most of these wins were ho-hum wins. Like, let's face it, it's the Big Least this year. It just is. You got two teams, 2.5. I'll call Villanova. I don't want to disparage what Kevin Willard's done. He's done a hell of a job. So let's call it a full 3. And Seton Hall, Shaheen did a good job, but they've obviously fallen off here. I just don't know if this St. John's team, again, I know they've done a good job running their stuff through Zuby and some of their other bigs now, but I still think when it gets down to it, to win 4 straight games without a high-level point guard. Like, Darling is nice to me as a backup. He's an awesome backup point guard. And I know maybe Mike will push back on me because he has made some big plays in crunch time. I just don't know if I trust him in the NCAA tournament. You put him in an Elite Eight game with that type of pressure on him. And I know he looks unflappable, but I wouldn't want him out there. I just would rather have a more talented point guard out there. And they're not a great shooting team. Those are the two things that worry me: point guard play and their perimeter shooting.
Well, the shooting's better. The shooting's better than it was last year. And I do think, and I've always, this is a much better offensive team than last season's team. I mean, they've cut the mid-range jumpers in half. They're playing a little bit more math ball than they were last year, certainly. But I mean, for Darling, it's hard for me to write him off as a guy that can have like a big moment in the NCAA tournament, because he just plays one way. Like, that's just, I think he only knows one way to play. And it may be, he could like, I feel like he would be the one at the end of the game where it's like, maybe if you're the fan base, you're like, why is he the one taking the shot? Oh my gosh. And then it's like, in Dylan Darling's mind, he's like, I'm the one on the floor that should be taking the shot. And I think that's what you want, or that type of mentality. So, but I do think for St. John's, the way that they kind of flip they invert the court just with the way their front court facilitates. And I think given the matchup in an NCAA tournament game, that's going to be unique for some teams to play against. I mean, there's going to be some Big East teams that are certainly used to it if you get them the second time around. But if you get the right matchups, and I've said this all the time, like, there's teams where in Arizona, a Duke, where I'm not sure the matchup really matters. If they play their game, they probably will advance. And there's teams that are more matchup dependent. And I think St. John's is matchup dependent, but I can't write them off. I mean, Final Four may be aggressive at this juncture just because we haven't seen them
But
tested
it wasn't preseason. I mean, it wasn't preseason.
No,
we were talking about St. John's as potentially a Final Four team. Then we really wrote them off. And now I think, obviously, with this win, you look at them differently, right? And you should. You should. I mean, they beat a UConn team that, frankly, the only loss they had was without Braylon Mullins and Terrace Reed, who, when you look at them tonight, those are 2 of their top 3 or 4 players. So
absolutely,
this was the first time that UConn lost the game, full strength all season long. And, it was a St. John's team that frankly, we've questioned and didn't have that statement win until tonight.
Yeah.